Art History at UIC. I'm really proud of you all for making it here through the crazy maze. I apologize for the massive construction project. Hopefully it will be over soon. So I'm going to do a little set of highlights of things that are coming up, and then I'll introduce tonight's speaker. But I also wanted to note, because I will forget this, that after tonight's talk, we're going to bring some food out from the back. So there'll be a little bit of snacks for you guys. So you don't want to leave. One, because Jamillah's so great, but two, because we'll have snacks at the end. So, hi all. Okay, so before introducing tonight's talk, I'd like to highlight some events that are coming up here at Gallery 400. Tomorrow night, the incomparable Anne Elizabeth Moore will be giving a performative reading, narrating her work as a writer, her history as a queer, and her experiences as someone who suddenly finds herself with a disability. This is presented in conjunction with our current exhibition, Making Chances. Anne's work, which will actually be transcribed during the performance, will then be included in the exhibition. That's on Wednesday at 6 p.m. in the galleries itself. Then, late Friday night at 10 p.m., Witch Hazel presents a performative music set in which the trans queer artists reimagine themselves as celebrities, mythical beings, and concepts, rather than people attempting to navigate the Chicago streets in a trans body. So that's Friday at 10 p.m., also in the gallery. Going to be really fantastic. And then next Monday afternoon, visiting independent curator Astria Superark talks with School of Art and Art History associate Jen de los Reyes, here in the front row, in a conversation entitled The Exploding Museum, in which they will explore their work within and without institutions and how to glean strategies and energies from social movements to rethink the exhibition as a form. So that's Monday the 28th, a little bit earlier at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. At Gallery 400, we take great pride in bringing a wide array of cultural production to public attention. Just from the list of the upcoming events that you just heard, you can tell that it's rich, deep, transformative culture that often doesn't get presented in larger institutions. Just like the work that's included in Making Chances, the work of Chances Dances and its community, and I feel kind of embarrassed because now I'm saying this in front of several people from Chances. The work of Chances Dances and its community that has made such a huge impact in the queer and art communities of Chicago. If you have not seen the show, I please urge you to see it. It's a fantastic exhibition, and you have to come back multiple times. So for all these reasons, it is such a treat to welcome to Gallery 400 and to UIC Jamillah James, who is currently assistant curator at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. As a recent LA Times article noted, in the last 6 years, there have been a total of 2 exhibitions by Black female artists presented at the 3 major LA institutions, or museums, I mean. One of those is the wonderful painter Njideka Akunyili Crosby. I'm sorry, I'm totally mispronouncing her name. Her upcoming Hammer Project show, curated by Jamillah James. That exhibition is accompanied by another Crosby exhibition at Art and Practice that sits alongside an exhibition of 2 excellent films by the Black female filmmaker Akosua Adoma Wusu, also curated by James. James is clearly transforming the norm at major arts institutions. In addition to these recent shows, James has worked with Hammer curator Ann Elgood on the spring 2015 exhibition Charles Gaines Grid Work 1974 to 1989, and with Hammer chief curator Connie Butler on the critically acclaimed exhibition and publication Mark Bradford Scorched Earth, which is currently closing at the museum. In addition to exhibitions at the Hammer, James organizes exhibitions and programs at Art and Practice, an art and social service organization in South Central LA. There she has programmed artist lectures by Jenny C. Jones, Kevin Beasley, Fred Moten, and Pat Thomas, Colleen Smith, and many others. Before moving to the Hammer, James held curatorial positions at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Queens Museum, New York, and the Hyde Park Art Center here in Chicago, and independently organized exhibitions, performances, and screenings in Chicago, Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia. Last year, she was named by Artsy Up and Coming, one of 10 young curators taking on the art world. No need to hide your face. And for those of you who want to see what she's looking at, she maintains a Tumblr called Frontiers. You can find it by just typing in Frontiers without any of the vowels. So please help me welcome Jamillah James. Thank you for being here.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, wow, so many friendly and familiar faces in the crowd. This is somewhat a homecoming for me because I've not been in Chicago in about 3 years and have not been here in any kind of professional capacity since the very beginnings of my career. But even as a student, it's kind of hard to say, was that a professional capacity then? What was I doing? So we're gonna kind of take a trip down memory lane and work our way forward to this present moment where I am at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, which was kind of this incredibly serendipitous opportunity that arose out of nowhere, and I'm super excited to be there. But since I'm in present company in Chicago, want to give a hearty shout out to Deborah Riley Parr, who really, without all of her encouragement and support while I was a student at Columbia College, I don't know if I would be where I am right now. And I got a little teary-eyed earlier when you snuck up on me, so I'm very happy that you are here. So, as was stated in the introduction, I lived in Chicago for about 5 years. I was a student at Columbia College, and we're gonna just take a walk down memory lane and work our way to the present day. So bear with me. It's gonna be a lot of stream of consciousness and a lot of rambling, but I'm sure you'll be able to walk alongside me with this. So, all right, I'm gonna just give you, this is kind of ground zero for young Jamillah as a curator. This was a house that I lived in from 2002 to 2003 that was called the Pink Section. My trajectory as a curator is a bit unorthodox in that I kind of started thinking about curatorial practice through being a booker of noise bands, experimental musicians, all kinds of foolishness that would take place in the basement of this place that I shared with a friend who now lives in Atlanta. And I was a student at Columbia while I was living here, and not being as up on my studies as I could have been, but I tried. But I was really invested in creating a safe space in this new city that I moved to after living in Boston for a number of years. And while I was in Boston, I started going to shows in Allston, which is an area that was like a student neighborhood outside of the immediate Boston Central, and also in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was in the late 90s, and it was when spaces like AS220 were very active, and of course Fort Thunder, which has kind of gone on to be this mythological being in counterculture where a lot of artists who went to RISD lived, and they used to throw parties and shows, and I would go there, take the 7 o'clock bus from Boston and take the 2 a.m., the last bus out of Providence back to my dorm in Boston. And I was really inspired by all the activity that was happening there at the time. So when I eventually left Boston and moved to Chicago in 2001, one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was how do I recreate these experiences that I felt that were really important to me as a young person in another city, and how do I bring along a lot of really awesome people with me in this journey. So I got it in my brain after being in a band. This is a picture that rarely sees the light of day. I know, oh my goodness, yes, take the pictures, take the Instagram images. This was me when I was 22 years old, playing in a band called X27, which has kind of a storied history in Chicago as people that were active in the Chicago alternative music scene at the time, and I was their drummer, number 7. And I played drums when I was in grade school. I wasn't ever very good at it, but with playing no wave, you don't really have to be good at the instruments. You just have to have a lot of attitude, which, yeah, I had a lot of attitude. So when the folks that were in the band with me moved on to New York, I moved into their old house, which is this space here that later became the Pink Section. And a number of you who are in the audience remember this space. And that was there where I made these friendships with some of you, like Latham and A and Dakota and some other folks. And this was a poster that I pulled up on the internet because there's not very much photographic evidence of these activities that I undertook at the time, and I really didn't have the archival impulse when I was 22 years old to really document anything. I found recently a folder of these posters that I made because at the time when I was at Columbia College, I fancied myself a visual artist, which was, you can't be a bee sculptor and make it in the world. So eventually I just stopped all pretenses of wanting to be a visual artist and concentrated more on doing art history. But I was still doing all these other things at my house and having, hundreds of people in my apartment, going crazy to these shows. And this is a poster that was for one of the shows that I organized. And I think this was probably in like 2004. So there's only like 2 or 3 images online that I was able to find for this. And eventually I moved to this building, which is 3012 South Archer, which is now known as the Archer Ballroom. But when I was living in Chicago, it was known as the Texas Ballroom. And I lived there with a number of people, like A, and a couple of other folks who are featured in the Chances exhibition. And this was really the space where the idea of becoming a curator kind of became a reality for me. And I was actively back in school at this time after taking some time off. And I became acquainted with a professor on faculty who invited me to be a part of the curatorial board at Columbia to help select exhibitions that would happen at those at the gallery spaces on campus. And it wasn't something that I really thought about too actively because I didn't even know what a curator really was. I thought that museum exhibitions just kind of appeared and didn't know really the labor that's involved in the way that I intimately know the labor now of making exhibitions. So it was this wonderful 5,000 square foot loft where a bunch of really fantastic people lived, and we programmed the space. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of parties. We cleaned up a lot of puke. It was, a very important time for me, and also the people that I met who were housemates, people that lived on the first floor, like Wu Sang, Math Bass, people like Lady Churchman who lived with me on my floor. These are folks that really influenced me much later on to think about some of the issues that I really hold dear now and things that I'm committed to as a curator and as a cultural producer in the world. And these are just some posters that I dug up for my 24th birthday party where lightning bolt played and the floor almost caved in, and yeah, it's crazy. So. Eventually, I graduated from Columbia. I moved to New York, not with the dreams of becoming a successful curator or artist or writer or anything, just kind of decompressing from the experience of being in school. But eventually, I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, which was kind of on a whim. My very close friend was living there, and she's like, oh, you can come here and you can do whatever you want. I'm like, that sounds like a wonderful proposition. I'm going to come down to Baltimore not knowing anything about Baltimore besides John Waters and her being there and maybe some like weirdo bands that I liked at the time. So eventually I moved to Baltimore, and in 2008 I started working on an exhibition because I took some time away from thinking about art, making it, reading about it, seeing it, and then I became antsy and really wanted to start making a way in the world and figure out what it is that I wanted to do. I was a grown-up kind of at the time and really just wanted to start working towards some of the questions that I had in my mind, and I had all but abandoned writing about art at that time, but just couldn't figure out a way for me to work my way into the art world, if you will. And being a Virgo, textbook, I'm really good at organizing things. I enjoyed organizing things, just punk shows and parties and whatever. And with the experience of being in school and working with the student galleries, I came to the epiphany, well, gee, it kind of makes sense because the only thing I really care about is art history and visual culture, and I don't want to write actively anymore. I should be a curator. And it's the only thing that's stuck, and it's the only thing I really can imagine myself doing anymore at this point. So I organized an exhibition called Agenda Queering Popular Media, which happened at Current Gallery in Baltimore. And it was a monster of a show that was a real learning experience for me, in that I put out an open call. I also did studio visits with people and reached out to friends who I felt would be, whose voices I felt would be germane to this conversation that I wanted to initiate about the ways in which LGBTQ identified artists used popular media and the different ways that they kind of toyed with it and changed it in ways that were kind of radical. So there is a laundry list of artists in this show. This is still, to date, the biggest show I've ever worked on, and I don't know if I'd ever take on a 30-plus artist roster ever again, because part of being a curator is kind of being a den mother to artists. I love it. I wouldn't change it for anything, but dealing with 30 plus people and their concerns, it gets to be a little daunting. So with this exhibition, this is a still from Liz Rosenfeld's Untitled Dyke Tactics Revisited, which was a remake of the Barbara Hammer film from 1971 to 1973. People that were involved in this exhibition were Latham Zierfoss, Dynasty Handbag, Edie Fake, who's also a former Chicagoan, Kate Hardy and Wynn Greenwood, Jenny Livingstone. I showed Paris is Burning in the context of the show. I also showed the documentary that Latham made called Pilot TV about the Pilot TV conference that happened the weekend that I moved out of the Texas Ballroom building, and Ryan Trecarton, who is still the only artist I've ever contacted through YouTube and actually gotten a response. So this is a still from Wynn Greenwood and Kate Hardy's new report. And then I worked on a couple of different exhibitions while I was in Baltimore. I financed these exhibitions out of pocket, which is nothing I will ever do again if I can help it. I worked as a nanny in Baltimore because there were really no art jobs. So I worked with this affluent Black family that paid me very well to drive their kids around in an SUV. And then, because I still wanted to work on these exhibitions and kind of feel like I was making a contribution to the world, the pay that I got from that, living in Baltimore is super cheap. So I was able to kind of direct money and funds and energy to making exhibitions. So there are a couple, I'm gonna go up a little bit. So these were two exhibitions that were kind of short-lived that I worked on. One was Altered States, which was a show that was a one-night thing for the Transmodern Performance Festival, which is still ongoing in Baltimore. And it was this, thinking about at this time in 2009, the kind of interest in the occult and psychedelia and all of these things, and also working collectively. So there are a couple of people that I invited to be a part of this show, Delia and Gavin, who are the DJs and performers, Delia Gonzalez and Gavin Rissom, Math Bass and Dylan Mira, Force Field, who were people that I encountered when I was going to Fort Thunder in the late 90s, and performances by the Lexi Mountain Boys and Soft Circle, which is Hashan Barucha from Black Dice. And another show that I did was Funny Games, which kind of looked at the comedic arc in recent video and painting and other things. So it was an opportunity, again, to work with people who I was really well acquainted with. And I'm not at the point now where I'm opposed to working with friends. I actually am very fortunate in that I have a lot of brilliant, awesome friends who are very successful artists. And working early on independently, it was very important for me to involve folks that I knew well and stood by their artistic practices. And these are two shows that really reflect that. Leidy was someone that I lived with who's a fantastic painter, Sarah Clendenning, Petra Courtwright, Scott Reeder, and always the bringing from cities where I lived, so New York, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, bringing them into conversation with each other. And one of the things I was really adamant about working in Baltimore, which is kind of off the beaten path when you think about where artist communities crop up, was having Baltimore artists be in conversation with national artists who may not have shown in Baltimore, maybe for lack of opportunity or lack of invitation, really. So it was really important for me to kind of try my hand at being ballsy and inviting artists who I had no relationship whatsoever with and saying, hey, I'm working on this show. Would you be interested? It's in Baltimore. I'm going to show you, in concert with other artists. 9.5 times out of 10, they were totally down for it. So it was really important to me as a young curator to make these relationships with people who I was reading about in Frieze or Art Forum and bring them to the city where I was working and living and have them be in conversation with local artists who, generally were maybe in conversation just with each other, but broadening the discourse. So the last show that I worked on when I was in Baltimore was called After Image, which was kind of this really tortured show because I was very sick at the time that I was working on the show and, 1 foot out the door. So there were a lot of problems with this show as some of the reviews touched upon. But it was this show where I was thinking, the title was really from a Section 25 song that I was listening to over and over and over again at the time that I was working on this show. But then there's this visual phenomena called the after image, which describes an image that persists in your line of vision even after the exposure to the original image has ceased. So with this exhibition, I was thinking about artists who were employing aggressive strategies of hacking, remixing, erasing, translation, and so forth, so that your idea of an image that you are well acquainted with. One of the artists, for instance, used imagery from the Challenger explosion in 1984, and the way that he turned it, changed the way that you would interact with that image, and it shifted it a little bit from your original idea of what that image was. So there are a lot of people that were working with sound, people like Rashad Newsom, this is a still from his performance Shade Compositions at the Kitchen. Other people like Wu Sang, this is a very early video of theirs called Shape of a Right Statement, where they're translating this manifesto that they found on YouTube by an autism rights activist named Amanda Baggs, and Wu's using this speech generation device to, in place of their actual voice. So there's this really kind of dramatic effect that's happening because you're looking at Wu and you're hearing this kind of machine voice speaking this very political and serious text called In My Language, which you could probably find on YouTube. Other folks that were in this show were Karen Sitter, the Israeli filmmaker, whose work Dream Talk, is a remaking of a soap opera, but every instance of a character speaking is really stilted and weird because she writes in such a way that the words that are being spoken never match up to what's happening on screen, and it never seems as if those voices are coming from the people that are actually speaking them. Martine Hendricks, Claire Evans of Yacht, and a number of other folks. All right, so I eventually left Baltimore and moved to New York in 2010 by way of my mom's couch in New Jersey, and started with my first institutional job, which when you're working independently in the way that I was working with no backing really and just kind of walking the tightrope without a net, getting an institutional job and talking your way into the door is really challenging, and I never thought that I would be able to ever get a museum job at all. But I was very fortunate in that I kind of just went ahead and applied for a fellowship at the Queens Museum, which is in Flushing, New York, and applied with the portfolio of work that I'd done in Baltimore, and was fortunate enough to be awarded the fellowship and to work on a number of exhibitions there in concert with Larissa Harris, who's the curator there, and Hitomi Iwasaki, who's the director of exhibitions. And it was at the time when Tom Finkelpearl, who's now the Commissioner of Culture for the City of New York, was the director of the museum. And they took a chance on me as a relatively untested young curator, and it really paved the way for me to be able to move forward in my career, and eternally grateful for their support. One of the exhibitions, the only exhibition that I worked on solo for the museum, which the fellowship was structured in that you supported the senior curators, you worked on your own exhibition, and then on weekends you came in, and it was under the guise of getting like field research for visitor response, but it was really, you were acting as a security guard because there was really only one security guard that worked there on weekends, so you're kind of like the backup security guard. And I can tell you that the experience of guarding my own show, and I'm a deeply neurotic, nervous person, I mean, I think all the best curators really are, but sitting in the gallery and like watching like little kids just like barrel towards things and go hands first, and fighting the impulse to be like, no, and like throw them off to the side, but like trying to be like really diplomatic when you're like dying on the inside. It was, I think Tom was right in that it was a very important experience to be on both sides of making the exhibition and then monitoring how it's received in the public. But it was also terrifying, and my blood pressure like went through the roof working that job. So the exhibition in question that was such a nightmare to guard was a show called Not the Way You Remembered, which happened in 2011. At the time, I was looking at Louise Lawler and looking at Marcel Bruter's Museum of Modern Art Eagles department and kind of all the museological language that he was using with making these installations. And I started thinking about the ways in which museums collect, like what the collecting practices of museums are, and like why certain objects are deaccessioned or why certain objects are actively sought after. and the ways in which young artists are using this language, this kind of taxonomy of mounting, display, labeling, so on and so forth. So it was, again, an opportunity for me to work with, a number of Chicago artists like Jason Lazarus. I included his Too Hard to Keep project in the main entry space at the museum. Amanda Ross Ho, who's now in Los Angeles, but studied here. David Murray, who I think went to Columbia, and a couple of other folks like Brendan Fowler, Rashawn Griffin, Zach Kitnick, and Lauren Luloff. So this is Amanda's work that was in the show. And this was actually the first time that I dealt with a commercial gallery, was trying to weasel a work out of them. And it worked. I guess my powers of persuasion are really good. I have no idea. But this was a work by Lauren Luloff that was in the show called Striped, which it's a bed sheet stretched over a masonite panel with oil paint on it. And her project really was going to different thrift stores, collecting sheets, thinking about material history embedded in these materials and kind of repurposing them and representing them to in a different space, in a different time, and to a different audience. I worked on the Queens International 5, 3 points make a triangle, with Larissa Harris and Manuela Moscoso, who is now, I think, at the Museo Jimex in Mexico City. Working collaboratively is not something I do well, but this was a learning experience, working with two curators who I respected quite a bit, and it was another monster of a show in that there were a number of artists involved. The Queens International functions much like the Whitney Biennial or even Made in LA at the Hammer, where it's like a very local look at what's happening at present. It's to kind of get the temperature of what's happening in the art scene at the time. So we were super intrepid going all over Queens, which is the most diverse county in the country, as far as I understand. So, not just going to Long Island City, not just going to the outer reaches of Greenpoint on the border of Queens, but going out to Kew Gardens, going out to Rockaway, going out to Jamaica, and meeting with different artists that were working, out of their homes, out of their studios, out of garages, doing stuff at their office, after hours. And we came to a really nice cross-section of people that were, senior artists, but also emerging artists that were working in the county at the time. And the entire time that we were working on the show, Larissa was 9 months pregnant. So we visited over 200 studios, the three of us together, just setting up 10 studio visits in a day, which doing 5 studio visits it feels like a good amount of conversation to have in a day. 10 is a whole other story. 15 is like, what the fuck are you doing? It's really super, super intense. And Larissa, was 9 months pregnant, walking around doing these visits with us. And it was the last night that we did our visits that she finally went into labor and had her kid. So it was like, we're all done. I'm going to go over here now and have a baby, and you guys deal with this. So we did, and we got a really great roster of people together. Gintaras Diziapetris, Trevor Shimizu, Rachel Mason, who's been performing a lot recently, Angel Otero, who went to the SAIC, a couple of other folks. And there is a website online still active, I think, at the Queens International 2012 website, but I don't know who's paying the bill now. There are some other exhibitions that I worked on kind of outside of the museum. The Order of Things was one at Nurture Art, which is this wonderful nonprofit in Brooklyn, in Bushwick on Bogart Avenue. This one was, I think, right after 2012, when everyone was freaking out that the end of the world was coming. I mean, that happens ever so often, but I was really thinking about, well, what is our relationship as humans to these apocalyptic predictions? And different artists were using, I observed a number of artists kind of using this weird, cold scientific language at the time, so I brought some of them together for this presentation. Did a show in Baltimore after I left it called Primary, with 10 female artists working in abstraction, Joanne Greenbaum, Fabienne Lasserre, Claire Grill. And it was thinking about, it was at this moment where new casualism was a thing, and I guess it's still a thing. I stopped paying attention. But different, women artists that were kind of using, whatever materials were at hand, kind of working in a way that, challenged traditional conceptions of beauty, So I put them all together. It was a really fun show and kind of a nice homecoming for me in Baltimore to organize this show. These are Joanne's little ceramics, and one day I hope to inherit one of them. And eventually, after being at Queen's Museum, I transitioned quite smoothly into working at the Studio Museum in Harlem, which is a museum that has always held, as long as I've been conscious of it, a deep significance for me, as it's the premier institution for artists of African descent. And Thelma Golden, who's the director, is kind of this figure that looms really large internationally because she's a little goddess, and she is always on the forefront of thinking about what it means to be a Black artist at the time. And she has this gift of knowing who's going to be hot, when they're going to be hot. And it's, to get to learn from her and work with her closely for a year, and then I stayed on working on other things at the museum, was really incredible. And the other reason why the Studio Museum is important to me was that initially when I started school 100 years ago, I thought I was going to be going for creative writing, and my mom was like, okay, you're never gonna make any money, but you're gonna be a writer and that's gonna be great. So after that, I changed my major about 1,000 times, and then, eventually, came to the point where, art history, media studies, visual culture, these are the things I'm most invested in. I'm gonna be a curator. And she's like, what are you talking about? What is that? What are you gonna be doing with yourself? So, I was toiling away for a long time and not exactly having the full support of my family because I just didn't get what I was working on. But there was an occasion where I took my mother to the Studio Museum, on a visit home from Chicago over Christmas, and it was when the show Frequency was on view at the museum, which is part of the museum's signature emerging artists shows. 4 was the one in 2012, Flow was in 2008, which was international artists, Frequency in 2006, and Freestyle, which is kind of now legendary, in 2001. And I took my mother to the museum to see Frequency and to be like, look, Mom, I want to be a curator. This is what it means, putting together exhibitions, working with artists. These are artists of color. Being in the art world doesn't mean that, I have to look one way or the other. I can be a part of this. And that was the moment that she kind of got it. And it took 100 years to get her to that point, but now my mother is my biggest cheerleader, which is great because I'm her only child, so that's, she only gets one to support her. So, it's either me or I don't know who. But at the Studio Museum, I assisted on a number of shows, which helped me get up my chops for working in museums. So doing all the boring stuff that artists don't get to see, like loan agreements, calling collectors, stalking collectors, emailing collectors 5 times a day to return a loan agreement, calling galleries, begging for things from galleries, so on and so forth, all the administrative foolishness that happens in order to make an exhibition possible. So I worked on 4 at the Studio Museum, which was the 4th installment of the F series of emerging artists. A number of folks from Chicago were in that show. I worked on that with Naima Keith, who is now curator at large at the Studio Museum, Thomas Lax, who's at MoMA now, and Lauren Haynes, who's the associate curator at the Studio Museum. There was a publication. It was, again, dealing with not just 3 curators of, different interests and temperaments, but also 30 artists. And I also worked on the catalog as an editor, and dealing with 30 artists and then 30 writers that we commissioned. And on top of that, a really tiresome graphic designer, and getting that all together into one package. And I also worked on a couple of other shows more closely with Naima Keith. One of them was The Shadows Took Shape, which was a look at the international throw of Afrofuturism, the international influence of Afrofuturism. Also, When the Stars Begin to Fall, which was a look at outsider art, or the aesthetics of outsider art, which was organized by Thomas Lax. And I also got to organize my own exhibition called Brothers and Sisters, which was a collection-based show inspired by the number of holdings that we had of Beaufort Delaney's work, who was an artist that was active kind of parallel with the Harlem Renaissance, who eventually expatriated to France, as a number of black folks did during the Civil Rights Movement, and made this really wonderful body of abstract painting. And I wanted to draw some connections between his work, which we had 12 of his paintings in the show, in the collection, and more contemporary artists, some of which were his peers, like Herbert Gentry, Jack Whitten, and a couple of other folks, and people like Sam Gilliam, Alvin Loving, and then artists such as Julie Moretu, Corey Newkirk. And I was always really obsessed with this piece, so that was like secretly the starting point of this show. But Buford, I felt there was a nice conversation that was happening, and there have been a few occasions in which the museum has looked at the legacy of black artists using abstraction, and this was another occasion that kind of looks at the cross-generational conversation. And this was a secret sleeper hit of the show by Al Loving called Shelley, Fran, Susie, and Andrea, which was a collage. Let's see. I'm gonna bear with me a second. Okay. So one of the major things that I worked on at the Studio Museum was being the research assistant on what became Charles Gaines' grid work, 1974 to 1989, which was organized by Naima Keith, and eventually traveled to the Hammer Museum, which was the first thing I really worked on once I got to the Hammer. And when I started at Studio Museum, Naima started maybe a month before me, and when she came to me, the first thing she said was, I got this idea, I'm gonna need you to help me. I want to do a show of Charles Gaines. I'm like, I don't know who that is, but I'll help you anyway. And it was really like a struggle to get the show on the books because he wasn't someone who had a current profile in New York. He was someone that was hugely successful in the 80s and the 70s, working, like being represented by John Weber and Leo Castelli, who were these big blue chip titans who weren't really working with African American artists at the time, but he was able to be in conversation with people like Saul LeWitt and Lawrence Weiner, but wasn't embraced by the Studio Museum at the time. So this was a chance to kind of take a corrective action on Charles's legacy and also on his presence at the Studio Museum, which he didn't actually get the opportunity to show there until, I want to say 2011 or 2010, when he was in 30 Seconds Off an Inch, which was organized by Naomi Beckwith, who is at the MCA. Charles was a leading practitioner of conceptualism. He was a close peer of Saul LeWitt. He's also been at Cal Arts since 1989, where he still is teaching. He made a body of work from 1974 to 1989 that hasn't been shown in a museum context in some time. We were able to find a lot of work that had been thought lost. My nickname with working on the show was Art Detective because I would be fast on the fingers on Google. And with this room here, which is his Numbers and Trees series, which was his return to painting after a number of years of working, with drawing graph paper, which if you see these things up close, particularly things like this where there's like the graph is very present, he hand drew every piece of graph paper that was in the show, and it's totally mind-blowing. I didn't know that until the Hammer's iteration of the show, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But working, panel after panel after panel, and then he did this body of work, which there are 89 of these in existence. We were able to locate 30 of them, which was the biggest showing of this body of work. And the ones that are at the far end on the left side were ones that had never been seen before because somehow they fell into nefarious hands and were being traded on the black market. And I found them. And the galleries that represent Charles, Suzanne Vielmetter and Paula Cooper, were able to recoup them so that we can show them in this show. And now they're back in circulation, which is super exciting. So this is our presentation of grid work at the museum, and it was a big moment for Charles. He's had incredible success in the last several years, and there's been a nice amount of renewed attention to his work, which is so rigorous and incredible and intelligent, and I love Charles to pieces. And he's in the Venice Biennale, he's about to do a show at Paula Cooper, he's here, there, and everywhere. And having him at the Hammer was really important to us because of our ongoing relationship with him and him being just like this institution in Los Angeles and having taught many artists that we know and like and follow, like Mark Bradford, like Josephine Mexeper, so on and so forth, have been students of Charles's, and his legacy is writ large in LA. am I doing on time? Am I doing okay on time?
10 to 7.
Okay. And this is until 8? No?
No.
How long?
Like 7:15.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit because I have a lot of slides. Okay. So very quickly, before moving to LA, I did a residency at Vox Populi where I met Bobby, who's in the back. It was this crazy whirlwind thing where I found out that I got this job at the Hammer. I was in this PhD program that I had just accepted to go into, and then the job offer at the Hammer happened, and I dropped out of the PhD program, and 6 weeks later I was in LA. But all the while, I was commuting back and forth to Philadelphia. Even like the second to last week, the weekend that I was leaving to go to LA, I was in Philadelphia producing a program and then like throwing my crap in boxes and like hoping for the best. So I organized a couple of programs. I moderated a talk with Ann Hirsch and Jacoby Satterwhite. Hosted a number of performances. This is an image of Sophia Cleary at left, Colin Self, who is an old Chicago folk, and Niv Acosta, who is just recently in the New Museum Triennial. And the work that they did during the performances that I organized was a study for the work that they went on to realize for the New Museum Triennial. Organized some screenings. The Fantasies Given to Us May Never Be Fixed, which had Amy Gogan in it, and also Erica Beckman and Mike Kelly, Alan Kalpe, Narcissister, Brian Zanisnik, also something called Made for Television with Alex DeCorte, Martine Sims, who's an old Chicagoan, Daniel Dean, Meredith Sellers, and Devil Cohen. Okay, I'm just going to go through these other projects real quick. Okay, Frontiers, frntrs.tumblr.com, which acted as my sketchbook for a number of years of things that I was interested in, things I was looking at, shows I was going to research for me, kind of keeping my process as a curator really transparent for people that want to look and see what I was up to. I started in November 2009. I updated when I can remember that I still have the blog. So it's just one of those things. Dirty Looks on Location in 2012, which is a marathon screening that happens every few years where Bradford Nardine, who's the director of Dirty Looks, organizes a group of curators to organize an event every night in different sites all over New York City, and he's currently working on an iteration in Los Angeles. For my contribution, I hosted screenings in U-Haul trucks that I rented and hot-wired a projector and a video machine, a VCR. Yes, a VCR, and parked in front of kind of ghost locations that were at some time popular nightclub spots or meeting grounds for LGBT folks. So I had a screening outside of Uncle Charlie's downtown, which used to host this Dynasty night in the 80s, and anyone that knows me well knows that I'm a huge fan of Dynasty. And I screened Joan Braderman's Joan Does Dynasty, which is this deconstructionist look at the tropes of Dynasty, and a lot of Alexis screen time and talking about Stephen Carrington, who is one of the first major primetime queer characters on TV. Marlon Riggs's Anthem, which was a music video that I screened on the West Side Highway, a really rainy day, where the former site of Peter Rabbit's, which was this Black and Latino club that my mom, when I told her I was working on this project, told me that, oh, I used to go with your Uncle Dwayne to Peter Rabbit's in drag, and we used to go with him, me and your aunt and your Aunt Donna would go and party with him, and then just leave him to go on and do his business, and then we would go home. And I was like, great, Mom, that's awesome. And then I also screened Cheryl Dunye's She Don't Fade. Cheryl Dunye was kind of was a part of a queer new wave that emerged in the 90s with Sadie Benning and Tom Kalin. And it's a really fantastic video, and I hosted it at the corner that's like now a Chase Bank or something, where the Flamingo Club used to be, which used to host this very long-running lesbian dance night called the Click Club. This is something you can see online, my peanut head talking about television. It was a talk that I did called Comic Relief on Art and Television for the Center of Experimental Lectures at MoMA PS1, hosted by Gordon Hall, who is also a former Chicagoan. Recently, I participated in a talk via Skype on a panel at the Goethe Institute in New York, organized by Malik Gaines, Alexandra Sagati, and Jade Gordon of the performance collective My Barbarian, talking about the films of Werner Fassbinder. And I delivered a paper called Madness, Melodrama, Margit on Margit Karstensen in the films of Fassbinder, who is always his leading lady and just a neurotic mess. Some recent shows talked about grid work, something that just closed. Mark Bradford's Scorched Earth, which Mark is a longtime Los Angeles artist. This was his first institutional show, solo show in Los Angeles, which is kind of bonkers knowing what his trajectory has been over the years. So it was a show conceived in 3 parts. This is the Hammer's glorious lobby, where he did a site-specific painting, which is an excavation of many, many layers of paint. The Hammer's lobby is often the site of Hammer projects, where we invite or commission an artist to do a site-specific work on the lobby wall. There have been 39 projects before. Mark is not a Hammer project, but he is the 40th project on this wall. There's hundreds of layers of paint that he went through, kind of using his typical language that we've become acquainted with Mark, where he sanded and routed out a silhouette of the United States as a map, but the numbers that are in each of the states corresponds to the number of people in the population per 100,000 who were living with AIDS as of 2009. And Mark, being an abstract painter, he wants to kind of spread out the idea of abstraction to other realms. So visual data is something that's an abstraction. You look at this, you have no idea what the numbers could correspond to. And that's something that he's really interested in, and also using out data that he's sourced from the internet, which is a really weird place to get information from. But it's something that he wanted to put a little bit of distance with the data that he was culling, but also talk about things like the Ebola epidemic that happened last year, where the media kind of went hog wild misrepresenting the facts about Ebola. And for Mark, this reminded him of the early years of the AIDS crisis, where there was a lot of misinformation in the public domain, and there still remains a lot of misinformation in the public domain. There are also 12 paintings that were on view. This is one of our galleries. This is the part of the show that just closed. These are my favorite paintings in the show. These 12-foot by 12-foot curtains, that are canvas with black paper that he's affixed with a gel medium. He let them dry outside, and then he kind of ripped away some of the layers of the paper to kind of dye it in this really fascinating way. And there's also this incredible video that's in the show called Spider-Man, which is only the 4th media work that Mark has realized, where he's performing as a Black stand-up comedian and kind of talking about, Eazy-E being, one of the early prominent people to come out publicly as being someone that was HIV positive. He's talking about Michael Jackson. He's talking about all these different things, all kind of neatly wrapped up in this conversation about the performance of masculinity. And Eddie Murphy's Delirious was a big point of reference for Mark in conceptualizing this piece. And initially it was to be a one-to-one performance of Delirious, but thankfully, he moved away from that into this really captivating, wild work that hopefully will have a life somewhere else, maybe on the internet for you guys to see. I don't know. So I'm gonna play this video. This is about art and practice, which is Mark's foundation in Los Angeles. Oh, Lord have mercy, sorry. Of which I'm the curator of programs and exhibitions.
Foster care is a crisis mode. Crenshaw High School, over 50%, we believe, in foster care. It's epidemic.
They don't have their bedroom in their parents' house. They don't have the money or the know-how to apply for college. About 50% of foster youth, when they emancipate, are homeless within the first 2 years of emancipating. And so they're left with nothing.
Art and practice is two-pronged. First, they want the kids to understand how to approach a job interview, write a resume, how to dress, how to get jobs, how to make their way in the world.
Mark understands this population from being from this area. He understands these kids.
They need jobs, places to live, and then we can talk about everything else.
The second part of it is an art gallery, and the Hammer Museum is his partner for the art gallery.
It's bringing light to the youth and to other people that are less fortunate.
Art was the way that Mark found his path, and he's part of the Hammer family in a big way.
I feel like artists are outsiders for one reason or another, and in many ways, foster youth, through no volition of their own, are outsiders. So I thought, well, one outsider group to another, maybe we can create a platform and maybe we can create a conversation.
The issues around contemporary art are the issues that all of these kids face in their lives. Race, sexuality. Mark is saying, I want these conversations to happen here, in my neighborhood.
I think there's a lot that we can offer to the overall palette of Los Angeles that will enrich it in a real way and help us go into the 21st century in a new way.
All right, so art and practice is the main thing that I work on in addition to working on shows at the Hammer. I'm going back to Los Angeles tomorrow to start hanging another show, which is my 6th show that I've hung this year, which is completely bananas if you think about what making an exhibition is. So Art and Practice is someone that we're partnering with in a mentorship capacity through fall of 2016. The Hammer, specifically me, is doing the programming, the exhibitions, the programs, other things that supplement this other social services side of it, which deals with the foster youth in Los Angeles, and specifically the transitional age youth who are aging out of the system, ages 16 to 21. At Crenshaw High School, which is a neighboring high school, there's something like 60% of the kids that are there are in the foster care system, and this is something that Mark, having worked in Leimert Park for a number of years, like his mother's beauty salon that everyone has heard about when talking about like his mythology as an artist, that's part of the Art and Practice complex now. This is an image of what's going to be the Esalen bookstore and the program space. Esalen bookstore is a Black-owned bookstore that's been in Leimert Park since the 80s, and they lost their lease on their storefront. So Mark's like, come across the street, moving in this space that I've bought, and we're gonna work together and kind of make something really exciting happen again in Leimert Park. One of the exhibitions that we opened, the first one was Charles Gaines' librettos, Manuel de Falla and Stokely Carmichael, which is this collision of opera by Manuel de Falla, who is like a early 20th century composer, jammed alongside this 1969 speech by Stokely Carmichael, who is the Prime Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party. Charles made 12 diptychs, kind of going through the libretto and going through the speech. There's a residency program that's at Art and Practice as well. One of the invited artists that was in residence at Art and Practice, which is ending now, is Dale Davis, who with his brother Alonzo Davis ran the Brockman Gallery in South Los Angeles from 1968 to 1989. They were early supporters of people like David Hammonds. They gave David Hammonds his first solo show ever. Worked with Senga Ngugi, Noah Purifoy, John Outerbridge, so on and so forth. This is a close-up of the wall that combines a lot of the ephemeral material that's in the archive, which the project this year for Dale was digitizing a lot of this stuff, and right now we're working on hopefully getting it housed permanently somewhere at a research institute where people can have access to this stuff. So part of the project that was really important to me was giving face to a lot of the artists that, you know, may not have been shown somewhere along the line in art history. So there's people like Senga Ngugi, who's the second from the left, Maren Hassinger, who's the second from the right, Dan Conchler, who's in the center. These are posters that the Brockmans produced for their shows. So John Outerbridge, the poster for the Belly series, which was David Hammond's first show. They did a lot of collaborative work with organizations and institutions in Los Angeles, like LACMA, the Art of Brockman Gallery, Mali, and Upper Volta as a poster for a show that they worked on at LACMA. There's press releases, all kinds of different materials that kind of come together to make and illustrate this history that's really rich. And this is from the beginning of the timeline. You have the Davis brothers there with their aunt who helped finance it, John Outerbridge, Elizabeth Catlett, and Noah Purifoy on that center line. Programs, as was mentioned, with Kevin Beasley, Fred Moten, Colleen Smith. I'll probably Chicagoan. And the current shows that are up right now that I opened on the 12th, Njideka Akinyele Crosby, The Beautiful Ones, and 2 films by Adoma Owosu. Njideka Akinyele is a painter who expatriated from Nigeria in the early 2000s. She works very large, lots of really intensive collage and transfer work. All of the information that you're seeing is really Xerox transferring that she's done by wetting the back of copies with acetone. This is part of a triptych where there's 2 other panels on the side. This is kind of the impetus for the title of the show, which is a series of works influenced by Diego Velázquez, Las Meninas, and his style of figuration, where she's depicting images of her siblings, kind of in these regal stances, but making mention to different parts of Nigerian culture through the images and the transfers, which are from popular magazines, family photographs, this like creepy doll from Ghana that is like this hard plastic doll that, you know, a lot of kids had in their home, and she had one of those. This is a dinky iPhone photo of one of the paintings that's in the show that hasn't been shot yet, but she's kind of reversing her process in that she's blowing up photographs and now doing individual transfers of each of the sections of this table. And this is an image of her grandmother's table in Nigeria, and what Njideka told me is that the table kind of becomes a space for decoration. Like the houses are kept very spare, except for maybe a picture of a government leader or Jesus or something. And the table is where, you know, they bring out their fancy stuff and all their, you know, family photos and such. Adoma Owosu is the other person who is in the show. She's a filmmaker of Ghanaian descent. I chose to show Kwaku Anansi, which is it's just kind of her film. It's like the most critically acclaimed work that she's done as of late. It won the equivalent of the Academy Award in Ghana for Best Short. I paired it with an experimental short called Intermittent Delight. When I go back to LA, this is what I'll be hanging. A show of Njideka's earlier work. She's never been shown in Los Angeles before, so it's works from 2010 to 2014. This work, which is on the poster for this talk, and this that you can't really see very well, but it's a smaller painting called Jandit, which is kind of a one-to-one translation of her face here. And some of the issues that Njideka is thinking about in her work is the experience of like cultural dislocation after expatriation. Adoma has coined this term triple consciousness, which is an adaptation of W. Du Bois's double consciousness, to kind of extend it to talk about people from the African continent who go and live internationally and the experience of loss that they have, and trying to reclaim parts of their culture while they're living abroad and maintaining and building a new identity. So quickly, December 2015, John Outerbridge, who's a huge figure in Los Angeles. He's the director of the Watts Tower Project. He's been working since the 60s. Ann Elgood, the senior curator at the museum, is taking the lead on this, and I'm assisting her with the research for this, but we're going to be presenting some early work like Jive Ass Bird from 1971, and then these later assemblages from the late 2000s that he's made that are all kind of like face scale, that have this talismanic quality to them. And then a sneak peek on what I'm kind of working on right now. That's going to be my last show at Art and Practice before I don't know what happens. But title is in progress, Miserable Forms, which is a riff on, oh, I forgot who it is, but I think it's not Bertolt Brecht, but someone else in the theater world. But ask me later. And this is right now, at this moment in time, a cross-generational group exhibition looking at a lineage of artists using cartooning and illustration. This will probably change. I have some time thinking about artists who were based in California after pop, like the California funk artists like Robert Arneson, Peter Saul, Bruce Conner, Edward Keenholtz, other artists like Mike Kelly, who's, you know, huge in Los Angeles and elsewhere, of course, Paul McCarthy, and then other artists like the Chicago Imagists, like Sue Ellen Roca, people like Carol Dunham, Philip Guston, and then younger artists like Jamie and Juliana Villani, Alex DeCorte, Borna Samak. So this is what I'm kind of working on right now, in addition to all these other things. So this is just kind of my workbook right now. Robert Colescott is a more senior artist who I'm obsessed with and would really love to mount a proper retrospective of his work one day. Fingers crossed. Demetrius Rice, who's a Baltimore-based artist. Debo Eilers, who's based in New York and a sculptor. And that is pretty much more than enough, but that is it. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
So we're recording tonight's talk,
Oh, no.
and we'd like to have
Don't
all
do that.
questions on the mic. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic.
Please talk.
Hi, Jamillah, that was fabulous. And you look incredible for 200. I did the math. It just looking so good. So as you probably know, since you worked with the fantastic folks at the Queen's Museum, they do such incredible work, and especially socially engaged and community-based work. And I couldn't help but thinking about the art and practice program that you're helping with, and you're like, I don't know what's going to happen after this certain point, and
Oh, that was specifically about me because I'm
It's-
grant
okay.
funded, so I might go.
well, my question is thinking about how some organizations like the Queen's Museum have really been so instrumental in thinking about duration and working with artists like Tanya Bergera, Immigrant Movement International, and I'm thinking, what is the commitment that the Hammer has made to art and practice? How long is that? Because it's definitely something that within a community has to span beyond a traditional exhibition.
Sure. Our commitment, I mean, we began this partnership even before I began at the Hammer, and I started on July 1st of last year. We are committed to art and practice in that we want to get them to a point on the administrative side of things that they can really run a nonprofit on their own without our assistance. But we still are very much committed to being in Leimert Park, which is where art and practice is, and it's in South Los Angeles, just south of Culver City, where all the galleries are. But we are very much dedicated to maintaining a presence in Leimert Park and continuing to support art and practice, even if, you know, we got a grant from the James Irvine Foundation to do a public engagement. This is a public engagement partnership. And we chose to work with art and practice because of Mark's very long relationship with the Hammer and his close relationship with Annie Philbin, our director, and because of the rich history of Leimert Park in Los Angeles, you know, being the site of many different things that have happened socioculturally, artistically, so on and so forth. And we are very much committed to artists in Los Angeles, emerging artists, emerging forms, and emerging organizations. We've partnered with other people before, temporarily, like people like the Machine Project, who are based in Echo Park. We're working with a lot of people through Made in LA, which is our biennial that happens every 2 years. And we are very much interested in continuing to maintain these relationships and nurture these relationships. And, you know, should we not, for whatever reason, continue the partnership with art and practice, like, we still have their back regardless. They can always call us up, help, and we're more than happy to help them out and give them assistance wherever they need it, because we are the kind of bigger institution in there, the fledgling nonprofit that, you know, has a lot of catching up to do in terms of learning how to, like, run on their own. But we're also committed to working with the foster youth program also, and not just dropping into the community and then piecing out, you know, next year. Like, we definitely want this to be a long-term engagement, even if the players change, i.e. me, like in case I, you know, go somewhere else or get shuffled somewhere else, that we're still present and we're still supportive, and we're still supportive to the mission of art and practice, which is bringing together community, artists, and the people all together in one location. Did I answer your question? Kind of, sort of, okay. All right, exciting.
All right, I hate that this is being taped, because I actually have a real question. I'm not going to sound smart or anything. I really want to know. So, so the thing is, a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with Hamza Walker, and as you know, he's, you know, doing the LA biennial, and I was sort of trying to get, like, what was his theme and what was the through line, and he was like, "There's no theme. It's just all the artists in Los Angeles. It's about Los Angeles, right?" And I started like thinking like, okay, like what is there like, you know, in the food movement, they talk about like local fruits and local vegetables, right? And there's sort of this overriding political reason why, and you know, all these things are linked to like a social motivation. And then when you were talking about the Hammer and its commitment to like LA, I'm just sort of a little bit befuddled. Like, I mean, what is the local commitment to artists within a museum of contemporary art, and what is it like? What do you really think it means? You know, like, what are the politics, the aesthetics of sort of regionalism, and is that like different than like nationalism and like sort of like, you know, the way that people at biennials like Venice or otherwise, like they really want to challenge sort of national borders and boundaries, but then sort of stateside, it's sort of like a reinscription of sort of identity of a region, and you know, like what does it mean? So I would just really like puzzling through this a little bit.
I can't speak too much about Made in LA 2016 because I'm not working on the show, but the Hammer is a rare institution that really does put their money where their mouth is about their commitment to emerging artists. And we have a series, the Hammer Project series, that's been going on since 2001, where we do give platform to artists that are working locally, nationally, internationally to show at the museum. And with the Made in LA, the thing is, it doesn't function in the way that, say, the Whitney Biennial does, where it's kind of trying to look at this big picture of like what the arts landscape looks like at a time. It's not just, Made in LA is not just a focus on the emerging, it's kind of couching the emerging within everything that's happened alongside it. So with Made in LA and with the Hammer's commitment to, I know I'm like jumbling my words and I'm like forgetting your question already, but
what is the political or social commitment to regional artists?
Okay.
And the reason I asked this too is because there was a big debate at the National Museum of Mexican Art, because when they changed their name, they sort of started showing like Frida Kahlo and other people, and they moved away from local artists. But there was a sort of a very intentional discussion about saying that we are actually a museum that is about, you know, sort of a global identity, you know, sort of Latino, Latin American identity. I mean, it was sort of, so it was really, and I just wonder, like, what does it mean for you, really in particular, to be thinking about artists from Los Angeles? Because you mentioned it a couple of times.
Yeah.
You know, and
I mean, as someone who's like relatively new to Los Angeles and really only has a grip on Los Angeles from things that I read in art history books, to be there right now and working amongst working artists in Los Angeles and being at an institution that's really actively writing the history of these artists who, you know, beyond the Paul McCarthy's and the Mike Kellys, there's like a whole swath of people that are working in Los Angeles at present that we're working to kind of help them codify the language around their practice and also to kind of situate them in national conversations outside of Los Angeles, because it's not just about, I mean, Los Angeles is a wonderful place for artists to work. It reminds me a lot of Chicago from my time being here, and that there's a lot of freedom that artists have, and there's space, and there's, you know, a good community around it. But I mean, we are thinking about the micro and the macro and couching artists working in Los Angeles within larger dialogues internationally and globally. But I mean, I think for a museum to like make it their commitment to be both regional and global at the same time, I think it's still, I mean, I think we're kind of on the forefront in that we are really committed to emerging artists, and we're not just saying that we are and like giving one emerging artist a year a show. Like, we do it every exhibition cycle, and there's 6 cycles every year. So, you know, and with things like Made in LA, which I haven't worked on a Made in LA, so I'm kind of, I know the players, but not so much like the back history. I mean, I think we really just want to, as an institution, as a city, continue to assert our presence in the local, in the national conversation. It's not just about New York. Sorry, New York, I love you, but you know, there are other cities that are making viable, important contributions to the discourses that are important to all of us, and Los Angeles happens to be one of those places. And with shows like Made in LA and the rest of our exhibition program, we're trying to center, well, move towards the center, but not center ourselves in the conversation. Oh, I'm getting grilled.
This is a, I'm sorry.
Hot lights.
This is a question about the Bradford project, with the housing of the kids, and it's a very kind of general question. But I'm just wondering, the Christoph Wodichko homeless vehicle project he did many years ago, and I'm sure he at a certain point he ended up disavowing that project, and basically said, it turns out what I've done with all this great intention is I've designed a glorified shopping cart for people to sleep in. And in so doing, I feel like I've taken the burden of responsibility off of the state a little bit, right? By, sort of functioning as a kind of NGO and providing a sort of social service. And really, it's just a substandard thing that I'm providing. This is not a reasonable life for anybody to have, to live in this, this much better shopping cart than a regular shopping cart to live in, but it's still a shopping cart. And so I'm wondering, about social practice initiatives generally, and to what degree, particularly institutions like the Hammer, think about their roles as sort of validators of providing social services that traditionally we've thought that really should be provided by the state, and whether or not it lends credence to the impulse that we see coming from the right all the time that basically says we don't want government to do this, we want the church to do it, or we want whoever to do it. For example, just recently Bernie Sanders gave that talk at Liberty University in the South, and that seemed to be the dominant response was, well, he's advocating for the state, we really want the church to do it, we want to privatize it, we want to have the community to do it, we want to have local institutions doing it. So, I don't know, is there anything that you can say about the Hammer's institutional consciousness of that complication to what is a very well-meaning and really beautiful gesture of support? But also, it seems like, as with anything, it's also complicated. So to what degree is there a consciousness of that?
I think there's a great deal of consciousness around that, but the way that we've positioned ourselves as an institution, as people that work within the institution, is that we're citizens first, and we just happen to work at a museum, and these are some of the social issues in Los Angeles that kind of loom large. I mean, the homelessness issue is another thing that's like, I have never seen anything like I've seen the homelessness situation in Los Angeles, and I'm hoping at some point someone will take the lead in the arts community to maybe help in some way. I mean, we can't rely, as much as we should be able to rely on the government to do things, we can't. And I think, as artists, as cultural producers, it is part of our responsibility to not just operate in a vacuum, amongst each other and pat each other's backs and just read each other's reviews in art form, but really go out in the community and try to make a difference. If it's not through an exhibition per se, but just having the presence in the community to know that what is thought of as this huge impenetrable institution, which we try to make our borders very transparent. The Hammer is free. Anyone can come to the Hammer at any time. You can hang out in our courtyard, have lunch. You don't have to even go look at the shows. You can just be there. So we're functioning as both a community space, but also a space for art. And the fact that we're behind a project like this, there are other museums and institutions that have supported other social service-oriented arts organizations like Project Row Houses or what the Astor Gates is doing down in South Chicago. There is support for that, and it's not, I think it does come from a place of altruism, but also the reality is that we live in a very difficult, fucked up world, and we all need to take responsibility in some way, and this is the way that, people that work within the institution can really throw their power and influence behind that, and in turn, the people that support us will hopefully pay it forward and support organizations like Art and Practice and the larger picture issues that loom outside of, the little area that Art and Practice and other organizations like that are able to help.
Can I actually respond to?
Sorry. Well, I mean, I heard Tom Finkelpearl talk about this, and really beautifully, where he was sort of saying, I mean, museums actually also get massive tax write-offs, right? And so on the land, they're not actually paying school tax. They're not, paying the property tax that would go into it. And so there's a way that these so-called, nonprofits or private institutions actually really are sort of publicly funded by citizen taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. And there's an actual responsibility then for these museum and cultural institutions to sort of be public in a way, and they're sort of just another wing of the infrastructure of, what Althusser would, call this whole superstructure of our society. And so in that way, like museums as soup kitchen, museums as after-school programs, you're not actually letting the state off, you're just acknowledging how much you yourself are part of the state.
Yeah.
So. I don't know.
I'm gonna go over here.
No,
I'm gonna shuffle away.
Well, we can have this conversation.
I know how
later,
that works.
too. We'll have it. That's how your class goes, huh? Here, we don't want to keep line.
If anybody else has a question, I can give them the mic. And if not, we can go back to Blake. Did you have a question,
Still formulating.
Lathan, don't hurt me.
The girly.
Or I can try.
Oh my goodness.
It's more of just, I guess, well, it's not necessarily a question, but something I think about a lot is like that you spoke to is about sort of coming to in these sort of DIY, very kind of intentionally counter cultural spaces, and then sort of, and then now currently being in like a sort of a dominant cultural space. Like just thinking about that, what do you think about that? How do you, like, what are the feelings that you have? What are the, just, I don't know, just respond to that, because it's something that I think a lot about. I don't think it's like good or bad or like, but certainly the way that I say we being you and I specifically, because I've known you since that time, and we both used to be crusty punks, but like
Still a little crusty.
and still are a little bit, yeah. But also are bougie now in a lot of ways too,
Let's not
or
get
I
carried
am.
away.
I'm pretty sure you are too. But but yeah, so just thinking about like how like our younger selves might react to our older selves, or like if that even matters, and like just whatever. I think you get it.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of talk about this recently, about the structures of museums and the people that are represented within museums, working from security guard up to chief curator or director. And, being the old weirdo that I am now, I think the younger weirdo in me would be totally psyched that I've entered into the institution and kind of, become legit in a way, although I'm still not sure if I'm legit. I have a business card, but I don't know. But the fact that like I'm there and able to introduce some of my ideas that might not be the status quo or might not have been represented in one way or another, and the fact that my voice can be present in this space that, historically has been, gendered a particular way or raised a certain way, and the fact that I can be there is a radical gesture, and the fact that I can affect programming and like reach out to a larger audience beyond myself and beyond my immediate peers, it's kind of a radical gesture. And I think, 21-year-old or 23-year-old me would be pretty okay with that, I hope, I don't know.
There's a question over here.
Oh boy.
It's just a follow-up to that, actually. I was curious about how your intentions have evolved in what you put together, from the DIY to now. So just adding to that, like, what is the intent? Or, we can infer, you have an incredible collection of things that you've put forth that I very much appreciate. But instead of inferring for myself, I'd love to hear it in your own words.
For a while, when I was a student, I was more interested in like moving image and critical race theory and stuff like that. And those are still things that inflect the work that I gravitate towards, and the things that I'm interested in, the things that I'm interested in curating. I'm definitely more now thinking about traditional forms like painting and sculpture, but the ways in which, different bodies have worked in those mediums. So queer identified artists, feminists, women artists, artists of color, how all of these voices and ideas can come to, these forms and kind of reinvigorate and change the course of art history or change the canon in some way. And I think from the beginning, like one of my first exhibition that I ever organized was in 2004, and it was a show about sound art, and it's something now I'm beginning to think again about sound and the ways in which it's underrepresented still as a medium in the larger discourse. I mean, MoMA did a sound show, but that's like one show in 50 years that anyone has really done on sound. So what part of my project is as a curator is kind of reinserting certain ideas, certain identities, certain modes of production into the timeline of art history, and kind of looking at the ways in which things may have been forgotten or overlooked in some way, and kind of advocating for those things as vigorously as I possibly can.
Hi. I guess my question is, like, as somebody who kind of has participated too, and as like a, alternative space kind of cadet, and, worked with these guys too, and like in certain capacities, and kind of like looking at the history that Chances Dances is representing, kind of like, do you think it's important to like maintain some of these archives, kind of like you're pulling up some of these old images of spaces that you existed in, and kind of like, I don't know, how would we do that? Because that's something I've thought about too, in like the space that I had run, years ago, kind of like, well, like, what is it now? Like, no one remembers what it was. Like,
I remember.
But then, and then like, there's so many important artists that come out of it. It's like, you were working with like, A and like Wu Sang and like all these people, and then it's like, and the people that I was working with are like gone on, or like, how do we create art histories based on those kind of like experiences, or like, where is that DIY art history?
You have to keep everything, I'm realizing, like after the fact. Because somewhere along the line, someone is going to be interested and want to know. I mean, there's been a push in recent years of kind of historicizing alternative spaces, like Exit Art in New York did this fantastic show of like called Alternative Histories, about different alternative spaces that cropped up around New York. And it's kind of, especially with this project that I worked on with Dale Davis, like, it is mind-blowing how much he kept. Like, there's pieces of paper from 1968 that are in pristine condition that he had the forward thought that, gee, someone in the year 2015 is going to want to look at this and want to know about this history. I need to think about this. I need to preserve it. So whatever we can do to kind of reinsert those DIY histories that a number of us have authored or shared or participated in, like, we're the only ones that are going to steward that. And we can't just hope and pray that someday, some kooky art historian with an interest in DIY culture circa 2001 to 2006 is going to come knocking on our door. Like, we have to be the ones that preserve those histories, and, hope that at some point, if we're not writing ourselves into the history ourselves, like, someone else will eventually. Like, you don't have any images from DIY? Yeah, I mean, I barely, because I didn't know. I mean, I had a flip phone, I think. I don't know. No, I had a landline in 2001. I definitely didn't have a camera until I was like 27 years old, and like my iPhone barely works. So, even now, like, I have to consciously remember to like document. And even with like artists who I'm meeting with in studio visits, like, you have to like document your work like in such a way that, just picture it as if it's like a spread in a magazine. Like, it has to look good, because like you're doing yourself a disservice by not preserving your work, like photographically preserving your work, because anything can happen in that work. It's not guaranteed that the object is going to remain after the making. So also with these histories that we've written, like, the Chances show is fantastic, and I'm very excited to see all of that information in one space. And it's something that, has international, national ramifications. Like, it's something that people should know the world over, because it is as much an important project to all of us as it can be to like many other people. And it's just being conscious of that and like really working hard to safekeep it.
Are there any last question? One last question? Okay, well, we'll end it there. Thank you so much, Jamillah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. That's great. Thank you, guys.